Hi, I'd like to talk about my childhood upbringing, as I said in the former clip that I'd posted. That is, if I decide to upload it, because I think I went into too much detail. But for now, I'd just like to begin talking about my early childhood, just so I can give you a bit of background and how things started falling together when I realised something was up. This only took me about, several years to realise this, so it wasn't something I exactly wanted to remember, but as I've already said, I've been raised in a very large family as the eldest, in a family where I've always been raised to feel like some bastard child, or like some adopted child from another family. But the truth is, what I'm going to say is, my dad is my dad, and my mum is my mum. There's no doubt about that, and as you'll find out later, you might wonder, judging by my story, if the person who created problems for me, in this case also my dad, wasn't actually another person, which is strange, because growing up I've always felt like people constantly wanted to verify who he was and if he really was my father. But as years have gone by, people have said I'm a spitting image of him, and my mother likes to remind me of that, even though I've never really liked that at all, the constant comparisons, because growing up my mum would always confide in me like I was just about my dad, like he was some kind of villain that she did not want anything to have to do with. She never actually complained outright in front of, the kids or me about all his sins and his errors, ever publicly. If anything, she's always turned a blind eye and always, in front of him, acted like, he's the right guy or something along the lines. And I always felt like my mother was trying to confide in me, like, I was some friend of hers, but at the same time I never got any of the benefits a friend would have. And growing up, I remember trying constantly always to be on my best behaviour, and this resulted in constantly just impossible perfection, because no matter what I did, it was not good enough. The cleaning I did, my attitude, not comforting her every single time I should have. And some of my earliest memories of when I was 4, being raised just by her for the early years of my life. One time, I don't know the context because I was way too young to even understand. I was maybe 3-4 years old, and I can't remember what my mum was talking about, because I probably did not understand. And this resulted in, at the end of this conversation, but it seemed, to be honest, out of the blue, because I don't remember her talking to me in depth about anything in particular, and if she did, she used vocabulary that no 3-4-year-old could possibly understand. And she reminded me when I was younger, around 7, 8, 9 maybe, about how I refused to comfort her when she started crying after telling me this story, demanding I get her tissue, and apparently she said I said no, and that I refused to get her tissue, or comfort her. Now what I'd like to know is why I'd do such a thing, and considering it was just me and her for the first few years of my life, I'll never know, but I felt like there was this impossible expectation she wanted from me because she never really raised me in an emotional way. I was clothed and fed and taken care of from what I've been told, but I remember my earliest memories spending most of my life in an empty bedroom. Not empty completely, but in the first few years it was empty because, I don't know, maybe because of financial situations or something, but it was empty in the sense that I never felt any adult presence in this room. And I remember spending hours looking out my room, sat on my desk, looking out the window, playing with toys. I don't know why, but I even remember staring at a wall for hours. Maybe that was just my odd behaviour on my part, because only in recent years, doing my own research, I found out that maybe I'm mildly high functioning. And I think if this was the case, things were worsened. Excuse me if you hear that I have no idea who it is. That maybe some person has a horrible chest infection. It doesn't sound very good. Completely ruining my video, but oh well. Goodness me, it sounded horrible. I was going to say anyway, I learned to become very observant, and I just remember spending so much time on my own. My mum said I was constantly accident prone and I was always falling down the stairs, and in my early years that I had scratches all the way down my back because I'd run down the stairs and the carpet would sometimes move off the floorboards or something, and the nails underneath it holding the carpet would stick out, and I suppose I'd scratch myself very badly. So I don't know what that was about. All kids have accidents and it's understandable, but I just remember being blamed for being stupid, between ages 0 to 4, and that I was very slow to learn how to walk, crawl, or do anything for myself. But at the same time, she presented these constant contradictions which made absolutely no sense. I just remember being made to oblige to, comfort her and, being somewhat friends with her. And years later, when I was, when I had younger siblings, still I was quite young growing up, I just have a very strange memory, I suppose, going back to some very early years, but it just felt very empty. And where was I? I'm forgetting. Maybe I don't know. I don't like using those words. Sometimes I just have these mind blanks when every time I try to come to a crucial point and it does not seem to lead me anywhere, so I end up backtracking for ages, trying to remember what I was going to say. I sometimes feel like I'm not all there, to be honest, especially when talking about these memories. But she'd present these stories anyway about how I was always getting into trouble and ruining her belongings, and maybe that was the case, but I just remember constantly, maybe asking for attention. I think I developed a habit of being clingy as a small child and always wanting her attention. But I do remember some of my earliest memories also, and that even up to my teenage years, I would, every time I did something wrong, or I did not do something correctly, or I did not put everything away myself, or correctly, and I can't remember specifically, she would constantly, I don't know, I'm not sure if it was like punishment at first intended, but I always felt that if I waited a few hours after having done something wrong, even if I'd been spanked, she constantly gave me also a reason, another crucial point. She always said, "I'll give you something to cry about," constantly, which I find a bit ridiculous how a lot of people growing up as survivors of narcissists, I'd rather say survivors as opposed to victims, because I really cannot stand that word, ended up, I've read so much on websites, forums, blogs, and it sounds like all these narcissists, whether covert or overt, are carbon copies of each other, which I find very strange because it seems to me that one of the most common terms, "I'll give you something to cry about." And I always felt like the more I cried once being punished, the harder she punished me physically, spanking me. She even, again, I don't like thinking of myself as a victim regarding this, because it seemed I was not the only one being spanked growing up. Seemed rather common, but even though I don't justify spanking, I just think people manage with what little resources on parenting they had back then based on what their parents taught them. But I get the strange impression that I can't be sure that I'd been spanked probably harder and more often than my own mother had been growing up. I'm not sure, I cannot be sure of that, but I don't remember my grandmother being ever seeming the violent or sadistic type ever. If anything, my own mother would constantly berate my grandmother or hint that she was weak and that she was never hard enough. She was strict, but never to the point of, it seems, yelling excessively. And in the last few years, before my grandmother passed away, I just could not imagine this woman being the same as my own mother, so I don't know. On the other hand, I think my mother got these traits mostly from my grandfather, but I think he was quite possibly, judging by the complaints my mother had, that he was maybe an overt narcissist, but I'm not sure, to be honest, because that will be another topic for another time. But I don't like talking about these details, but I thought I should put it out there anyway. And again, when I was being punished, in my earliest years, I just have vague memories of just, I don't know, a flash of pain more than anything else. I think I just don't remember the context of a lot of problems that happened. I don't remember what I said, especially as I got older, what I did wrong, or what, I can't even remember specific words my parents used in most of my childhood, what they said specifically, but I do remember them lecturing me for hours and hours. But this was mostly my father who would do this once my mother, was gone, and they would always take turns punishing me. It was like a double punishment, even though I already would tell one of them, usually my dad coming second, that I'm sorry and I already know what I'd done wrong, over and over and over again. I just remember another word, the sentence that narcissists used from my father. He always said, "Sorry is not good enough," ever, and he would just repeat the same sentence over and over again. Not just "sorry is not good enough," but lecture at me in a circular fashion, to the point that it was like I was almost being drilled this lecturing information until I believed it, that I was not good enough. And I did, but it still would not stop him. He could spend sometimes 6 hours, well, maybe not 6 hours, but it felt like it, being 6 years old. It just felt like an eternity of being lectured and not being allowed to, go to my room, not being allowed to quit this conversation. I learned from a psychology book at a very, very young age, because my parents, my mother especially, loved studying psychology and acted like an expert. And maybe to a lesser extent she was a bit of an expert, but maybe I'm giving her too much credit. And I would read these books even if they were not appropriate for my age. And I learned that maybe around 8 or 9 from a book, not really made for children. When dealing with an argument, it's best to walk out of the room or say, I don't want to talk about this anymore. But this was taken as an attack as early as 7, 8 years old. If anything, every time I tried to assert that boundary, I was never allowed to do that. And if I tried to run away, my dad would chase me and hit me as well, or just pull my entire body weight by my entire ear until I got the idea. At this point, the original problem I'd caused, looking back as an adult, seemed completely insignificant and had no relevance to why my dad would be taking out all this intense rage on me, to the point I would lock myself in cupboards and try and hold the door and stop him from trying to open the cupboard. I tried to close the door and put a chair against the handle so it would not open, but this seemed to enrage my dad even more, to the point, I can't be sure, I think he'd almost unhinged a door or broken a handle with his rages. Now, the thing is, his full-blown rages weren't always that often, but when they did occur, almost always I was the brunt of it. My mum has never, ever, from my father, experienced any violence. I'm the oldest of quite a lot of siblings, and except maybe the one occasion which I'm not entirely sure of, but was probably triggered by me, apparently, they have, for the most part, growing up, never ever been hurt. If anything, all my siblings have learnt to hurt each other, be abusive towards each other, and I've noticed the older siblings, even as older teenagers or now adults. I'm not sure what goes on now though, because I left home at 18 and my younger siblings, each with a few years spaced in between, have gotten away with just, again, attacking younger siblings completely out of bounds, unjustified completely, like a 14-year-old sister yanking the hair of, 8-year-old sister, and another sister that is 6 years old, yanking them by the hair on their heads and their entire body weight, both at the same time. And my parents would just sit there and watch and tell my sister to stop it. I do feel like one of my sisters, one of the older younger ones, meaning younger than me, but older, the next eldest sister, in comparison to the rest of the sisters, would get away with yanking their hair, destroying their belongings, even in her teens, which is ridiculous, because I've never felt any need to be violent, no matter how annoying a younger sibling was, especially when the age gap starts getting bigger than 4, 5, 6 years, even a 3-year age gap, there's still no justification, even if you're in the same age group. It's just, I suppose, more acceptable. And my mum would just leave us to fight it out a lot of the time. Of course, this was for everyone except me, because if one of my younger siblings came complaining to my mother, she would become enraged, who would then, even if it took hours after my dad came back from work, to have his turn at attacking us, well, in this case me, and finding any little shred of evidence that I'd done something wrong, or hadn't done something like cleaning up a living room, or not doing something correctly, or me being lazy and not trying hard enough. And to go back to the earlier memories, this was before I had any other siblings. My mother, she would, again, give me a reason to cry for certain things. And I have a vague memory of her saying to me, when I was very young, saying, I'll spank, if you keep on going, I'll spank you with the back of my hand, so it does not leave bruises, but it hurts more. And I was just like, again, looking back, I've tried not to think about these things, because it's absolutely atrocious. I was also spanked with a slipper. Now, to be honest, these are things that maybe a lot of us have encountered, not just automatically from narcissistic parents, but maybe simply toxic parents, or unstable parents, or alcoholic parents, or just, a lot of parents. Even they may have even had fleas. Some parents out there. So I'm not saying that it's still not justified, but it's not that uncommon, at least the impression I get. But whether it was common for people in my age group growing up to have that, I'm not entirely sure. I get the impression that most of the parents my parents knew as friends, or parents of classmates, they always seem to be rather educated on these things, like my parents, but the difference is they just never seemed, I can't tell behind closed doors, ever aggressive for the most part, because most of the time the kids reacted in a completely different way and had a relationship with their parents since a very young age that allowed them to have this confidence, or maybe even, just maybe even bordering onto a friendship, even though being friends with a parent is not really a replacement for, a parent-child relationship.